I've always been a nervous flyer. Something about being 35,000 feet in the air inside a metal tube just doesn't sit right with me. So when I boarded United Flight 1429 from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco that rainy Tuesday morning, I was already on edge. My palms were sweaty as I clutched my boarding pass, scanning the row numbers. 26F, window seat. At least I'd have something to distract me. The cabin was filling up quickly. Business travelers tapped away on laptops. Families with young children struggled to settle in, and flight attendants maneuvered efficiently through the narrow aisle. I slid into my seat, immediately fastening my seatbelt, despite knowing we were still at least 20 minutes from takeoff. "Excuse me," a soft voice said. I looked up to see an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes gesturing to the middle seat beside me. She wore a simple navy dress and carried a worn leather handbag. "Of course," I said, standing awkwardly to let her in. She moved slowly but purposefully, settling into her seat with a quiet sigh. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice carrying the slight remnants of what sounded like a southern accent. "I'm Eleanor." "James," I replied, offering a polite smile before turning back to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, droplets racing across the glass. I wasn't in a chatty mood. My anxiety before flights usually left me wanting to retreat into myself, maybe take a sleeping pill and wake up when we landed. Eleanor seemed to sense this and didn't push for conversation. She simply opened her bag and pulled out a paperback book with a well-worn spine. I caught a glimpse of the title, The Weight of Memory by Jodi Picoult. The last passenger for our row arrived, a businessman in his 40s who barely looked up from his phone as he took the aisle seat. The three of us sat in silence as the final boarding announcements were made. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard United Airlines Flight 1429 to San Francisco. We're expecting a smooth flight today with just a little turbulence as we pass over the Rockies. Our flying time will be approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes. I gripped the armrests as the safety demonstration began. Eleanor must have noticed. "First time flying?" She asked gently. "No," I admitted. "Just never got comfortable with it. Something about not being in control, I guess." She nodded. "I understand. I've been flying for over 60 years, and I still say a little prayer during takeoff." There was something calming about her presence. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, I found myself relaxing slightly. Maybe having a conversation would help distract me. "Do you live in San Francisco?" I asked. "No, just visiting my granddaughter. She's having her first baby next month." Eleanor's face lit up. "What about you?" "Business trip. I'm a software developer. My company is opening a new office in Silicon Valley." The plane aligned with the runway, and I felt my anxiety spike again. Eleanor noticed and gently patted my hand. "It'll be over before you know it," she reassured me. As we accelerated down the runway, I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. The familiar sensation of being pushed back into my seat, the momentary weightlessness as we left the ground, the subtle shift as the landing gear retracted, and then we were airborne, climbing through the clouds. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants began preparing for beverage service. The businessman beside us immediately reclined his seat and put on noise-cancelling headphones. Eleanor returned to her book, and I pulled out my laptop, hoping to distract myself with work. The lead flight attendant, a woman with a neat blonde bob and a name tag that read Sarah, made her way down the aisle with the drink cart. She smiled professionally as she approached our row. "What can I get for you?" she asked Eleanor. "Just a tomato juice, please. No ice." Sarah nodded and poured the drink, handing it to Eleanor with a napkin. "And for you, sir," she asked, turning to me, "ginger ale, please." As Sarah served our drinks, another flight attendant approached from the front of the plane. She leaned in and whispered something to Sarah, who glanced at Eleanor with a sudden look of recognition. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice now carrying a hint of excitement. "Are you Eleanor Mitchell?" Eleanor looked up from her book, seemingly surprised at being addressed by name. "Yes, that's me." The two flight attendants exchanged glances, and Sarah's professional demeanor momentarily slipped. I need to speak with the captain." "Excuse me." She hurried toward the cockpit, leaving her colleague to continue with the beverage service. I looked at Eleanor curiously, but she had already returned to her book, seemingly untroubled by the exchange. Within minutes, Sarah returned with the captain himself, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing that comes with decades of flying. "Miss Mitchell," he said, crouching slightly in the aisle to be at eye level with Eleanor, "it's an honor to have you on board. I'm Captain Reynolds." Eleanor smiled politely, but looked somewhat embarrassed by the attention. By now, several nearby passengers were watching with interest. "Thank you, Captain. It's nice to meet you. I hope you don't mind," he continued, "but several of our crew recognized your name on the manifest. Would it be possible to speak with you briefly when you have a moment?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." As the captain returned to the cockpit and Sarah resumed her duties, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. "I'm sorry," I said to Eleanor, "but I have to ask, why does the crew know who you are?" Eleanor looked at me with those kind eyes, and for the first time I noticed a depth of experience in them that I had missed before. "It's a long story," she said simply, "and we have a few hours before we land." "I was a flight attendant for 42 years, Eleanor began, placing a bookmark in her novel and turning toward me. "But that's not why they recognize my name." Outside our window, the clouds had given way to a patchwork of farmland far below. The steady hum of the engines provided a constant backdrop to our conversation. "Back in 1989, I was working a flight from Los Angeles to New York," she continued. "United 232. I didn't immediately register the significance, but something about the way she said the flight number made me pay closer attention. It was July 19th, a routine flight until we reached cruising altitude over Iowa. Eleanor paused, looking down at her hands resting in her lap. That's when our tail engine exploded. The realization hit me. United 232, the Sioux City crash, one of the most famous aviation disasters in American history, and yet, remarkably, one with many survivors, thanks to the heroic efforts of the crew. "You were on that flight?" I asked, stunned. Eleanor nodded. "Not just on it, I was the lead flight attendant." The businessman beside us had removed his headphones, now openly listening to our conversation. "The explosion severed all hydraulic lines," Eleanor explained. "The pilots had no conventional way to control the aircraft. They could only steer by adjusting the thrust of the two remaining engines. I remembered reading about this case in an aviation safety course I'd taken to help with my fear of flying. Against all odds, the pilots had managed to bring the crippled DC-10 to Sioux Gateway Airport in Iowa, saving 185 of the 296 people aboard. Captain Al Haynes was at the controls," Eleanor continued, "along with First Officer Bill Records, Flight Engineer Dudley Dvorak, and a DC-10 instructor who happened to be deadheading Dennis Fitch. Those men performed a miracle that day." Sarah returned to our row, now off-duty from beverage service. She stood in the aisle listening respectfully. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the empty space near our seats. Eleanor nodded and Sarah knelt down beside us. "Miss Mitchell," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion, "I trained as a flight attendant in 2010. They showed us the videos from United 232 and taught us about your crew's response. You're literally in our textbooks." Eleanor smiled gently. "We were just doing our jobs." "No," Sarah said firmly. "What you did went far beyond duty. You had less than 30 minutes to prepare the cabin for an emergency landing that no one had ever trained for. You saved countless lives." The businessman beside us leaned forward. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you Eleanor Mitchell?" The Eleanor Mitchell? Eleanor nodded, seeming increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. My aunt was on that flight, he said, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. Seat 29C. She's alive today because of you and your crew. By now, several other passengers had turned to listen. A flight attendant I hadn't seen before approached from the back of the plane. She was younger than Sarah, probably in her 20s. I'm Alyssa, she said. I just wanted to say thank you. We still study your techniques and procedures in training. Eleanor shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Please, she said softly, this is very kind, but I don't want to disturb the other passengers. Sarah nodded understandingly. Of course, but the captain would still like to speak with you when you have time. Perhaps in the galley. Eleanor agreed, and Sarah escorted her to the front of the plane. The businessman turned to me as soon as they were out of earshot. Do you know what she did? He asked. When the hydraulics failed and they knew they were going to crash, she and the other flight attendants had to prepare the cabin in minutes. They taught passengers the brace position, identified able-bodied people to help with evacuations, and moved children next to strong adults who could assist them. Another passenger leaned over from across the aisle. I'm a retired pilot, he said. United 232 changed aviation forever. The crew coordination between cockpit and cabin set the standard for all emergency procedures today. I sat in silence, processing this information. The quiet, unassuming woman who had been sitting beside me for the past hour was a genuine hero, someone whose actions had directly saved lives and influenced aviation safety for decades to come. When Eleanor returned, 20 minutes later, she was carrying a small box. She settled back into her seat with a soft sigh. The captain gave me this, she said, opening the box to reveal a set of United Airlines wings. It's very kind, but unnecessary. You deserve it, I said sincerely. What you did was extraordinary. Eleanor shook her head. What we did was work together. That's the lesson of United 232. No one person saved that flight. It was pilots, flight attendants, air traffic controllers, emergency responders, and even passengers helping each other. She turned to look out the window, and I could see the reflection of her face in the glass. There was a hint of pain in her expression. For every person we saved, we lost another. She said quietly, I've carried that with me every day since, but you couldn't have saved everyone, I responded gently. The fact that anyone survived at all was miraculous. Eleanor nodded slowly. That's what Captain Haynes always said. He never took credit. He always emphasized that it was teamwork that made the difference. She fell silent for a moment, lost in memories I couldn't begin to imagine. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You know what I remember most clearly? The silence. After the explosion, there was this deafening silence in the cabin. Then the captain made an announcement that changed everything. What did he say? I asked. Eleanor looked at me with tears in her eyes. We're going to be landing in Sioux City, he said. There will be emergency equipment waiting. For us, we have a serious problem with our hydraulic system. Just stating the facts, calm as could be, that's when I knew we had a chance. For the remainder of the flight, our section of the aircraft took on an unusual atmosphere. Word had spread throughout the cabin about who Eleanor was, and passengers periodically approached to shake her hand or simply express their gratitude. She received each one with grace, though I could tell the attention was draining for her. During a lull in the procession of well-wishers, I turned to her. How did you do it? How did you stay calm, knowing what was happening? Eleanor considered the question carefully. I wasn't always calm inside, she admitted, but passengers look to the crew for cues. If we panic, they panic. If we remain composed, they have a chance to remain composed too. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her dress. In those 30 minutes before landing, I aged years, but there wasn't time to be afraid. We had work to do. The captain's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into the San Francisco area. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Eleanor looked out the window at the landscape below, her expression thoughtful. "You know, for years after the crash, I couldn't be a passenger on an airplane. I always had to be working in uniform, in control in some way." "What changed?" I asked. "Time," she said simply, "and the realization that fear wasn't serving me or honoring those we lost. I had survived for a reason." As our plane began its gradual descent, Eleanor shared more details about United 232, how they had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best, how Captain Haynes had managed to steer a plane that experts said was impossible to control, and how the crew had worked together in perfect synchronization despite the unprecedented nature of the emergency. "We had 296 souls on board," she said. "After the crash, the first thing I did was count survivors. For hours, I kept counting, hoping the number would go up." "That must have been traumatic," I said. "It was," she agreed. "But it also showed me what humans are capable of in a crisis." The people of Sioux City came out in droves to help, regular citizens driving to the airport with blankets and first aid kits, offering their homes to survivors, donating blood. The worst moments in life often reveal the best in humanity. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the plane banked gently to the left. Through the window, I could see the sprawling bay. Area coming into view, the Golden Gate Bridge standing majestic in the distance. "Is your fear of flying better now?" Eleanor asked, noticing me staring out the window. "Actually, yes," I realized. "Talking to you has helped. Knowing that even in the worst-case scenario, there are people like you on board who know what to do. It makes a difference," she smiled. "That's good. Fear is natural, but it shouldn't keep us grounded." As we made our final approach into San Francisco International Airport, I found myself watching the flight attendants with new appreciation. They moved through the cabin efficiently, checking seatbelts and ensuring tray tables were stowed, carrying out the same safety procedures that Eleanor and her colleagues had helped shape decades ago. "We're on final approach," the captain announced. "Flight attendants, please be seated for landing." Eleanor gazed out the window. "Every landing is a small miracle," she said softly. "A testament to human ingenuity and skill." The ground rushed up to meet us, and I felt the familiar bump as the wheels touched down on the runway. The engines roared in reverse thrust, and gradually the plane decelerated until we were taxiing toward the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport," the captain announced. "Local time is 11:24 a.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 68 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until we reach the gate, and the seatbelt sign is turned off." There was a pause, and then he added, "It has been our special honor today to have Eleanor Mitchell on board, one of the heroic flight attendants from United 232. On behalf of all of us at United Airlines, we thank you for your service, Miss Mitchell." A spontaneous applause broke out among the passengers who had heard the story. Eleanor blushed and looked down at her hands. As we taxied to the gate, I realized I had completely forgotten my fear of flying. Instead, I felt privileged to have shared this journey with someone who had faced the ultimate test of courage and professionalism. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, passengers began the usual rush to retrieve bags and exit. Eleanor remained seated, letting others go ahead. "They always save the flight crew's story for last in the aviation safety courses," I told her. "They say it's because you exemplified the best of humanity in the worst of circumstances." Eleanor smiled. "We were just ordinary people in an extraordinary situation, that's all." As we finally stood to depart, the entire flight crew had gathered at the front of the aircraft. Captain Reynolds stood among them, and as Eleanor approached, he and the others offered a salute of respect. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "it's been an honor having you on board. You paved the way for all of us." Eleanor embraced each crew member, exchanging quiet words I couldn't hear. As passengers filed past, many nodded in recognition or respect, having heard the story during our flight. At the jetway, Eleanor turned to me. "It was nice meeting you, James. I hope you enjoy your time in San Francisco." "It was an honor meeting you," I replied sincerely. "You've changed how I feel about flying," she smiled. "Good. Remember, it's not about never being afraid. It's about not letting fear make your decisions for you." As we parted ways in the terminal, I watched her walk toward the baggage claim, just another passenger among many. Yet she carried with her a story of extraordinary courage, competence, and compassion, qualities that had saved lives and changed aviation forever. She was just another passenger until they heard her name. And then everyone remembered. Some heroes don't wear capes, some wear wings.